Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, ¿cómo estáis? Mirad, hoy empezamos una nueva sección del canal y va a ser el análisis de los topics, de los temas de la oposición de lengua extranjera e inglés para educación primaria, ¿vale? Vamos a ver todos los topics, las partes importantes que debemos tener en cuenta y al fin y al cabo cómo podemos hacer un tema absolutamente eh, que tenga todas las partes que necesitas para sacar una genial nota. ¿De acuerdo? Empezamos con Topic 1. Obviamente, Language as Communication. Oral and Written Language. Factors defining a communicative situation. Sender, receiver, etc. Functionality and context. ¿De acuerdo? Lo primero que debemos hacer cuando tenemos un tema es ver los puntos clave. Y en los puntos clave tenemos, obviamente, en el Topic 1, Language, Communication. Hablaremos del Oral and Written Language, los factores que definen una situación comunicativa, funcionalidad y contexto. Bien, vamos a ver los contents. Recordad que en inglés no existe index, son contents, contenidos. Introduction, language as communication. We will talk about language definition and characteristics, and then the communication theories, cooperative principle, speech act theory, and discourse analysis. Después hablaremos del oral and written language, characteristics of oral language, characteristics of written language, and the pedagogical implication in the class. And then we will have factors that define a communicative situation. Factors and types of communication. He añadido ahí el types of communication porque me parece interesante que veamos los tres tipos de comunicación que existen. And then functionality and context, functions of language. Conclusion, bibliography, and legal framework. ¿Ok? So, en la introducción lo que intentaremos es poner ya directamente la legislación. La Ley Orgánica 3-2020 del 29 de diciembre, Organic Law 3-2020, on December the 29th, y también el decreto 175/2022, que es el decreto de Cataluña. ¿De acuerdo? Es el decreto de educación de Cataluña, tanto de primaria como de secundaria. Decree 175/2022 on September the 27th. Entonces, aquí ya pondremos diferentes palabras clave como communicative proficiency, rather than the mastery of structures. Hablaremos de listening, speaking, reading and writing, que son las cuatro habilidades básicas del inglés. Hablaremos también de educational system. Hablaremos también de communication in language, primary education, ¿vale? Pondremos una serie de palabras clave y que nos ayudarán pues a ya ponernos en introducción de lo que vamos a hablar. Obviamente aquí, bueno, al principio de la intro ya ponemos as an introduction, I would like to highlight that every act that a human being performs has a communicative purpose. Our current educational system establishes that learning a language in primary education has a practical objective, which is to be able to communicate in that language. But communicating in a language means using the four main skills: listening, speaking, reading and writing, coherently, correctly, and proficiently. For this reason, communicative competence is our main aim as English teachers, as it is stated in the Decree 175/2022 on September 27th. This view focuses on communicative proficiency rather than the mastery of structures. In this topic, we are going to see the characteristics of oral and written language and how factors and context affects communication. Aquí toco todas las partes del topic que vamos a hablar. ¿Verdad? Bien, pues vamos a empezar. Language as communication. Primera parte que nos pide en el topic, en el título. Y como recordaréis, hablaremos de language definition and characteristics and theories. Language as communication. Primero es language definition and characteristics. So, we've got that language is a system of signs that combine by means of conventional rules to transmit a message. Among the main characteristics of language, we want to mention auditory vocal channel. Human language is a system of sound signals used between mouth and ear. O nos comunicamos a través de la boca y los oídos. Es decir, que lo que transmitimos por la boca se recibe por los oídos y así nos comunicamos Y por este motivo luego hablaremos de los tipos de comunicación, porque como sabemos hay personas que no pueden utilizar este lenguaje. Entonces esta característica, por ejemplo, no aparecería. Tenemos total feedback. Speakers hear and can reflect upon everything they say. Escuchan y pueden pensar sobre todo lo que acabamos de decir. Total feedback. Tenemos un feedback directo. Traditional transmission, obviously because of learning processes from thousands of years ago, and from generation to generation we are improving the language. Duality. The sound of language or its phonemes means nothing separately, but they become meaningful when they are combined with other phonemes to form words. Bueno, eso ya lo hablaremos en otro tema, pero como sabemos tenemos fonemas, palabras, oraciones y textos. Entonces, los fonemas, o we, o u, o ch, todos estos fonemas no sirven de nada separados, pero cuando se juntan forman palabras. Cuando se juntan palabras, pues se crean frases, y cuando se juntan frases, oraciones, y oraciones, textos. ¿De acuerdo? Displacement. Speakers can talk about events remote in time and space. Displacement significa que tú puedes hablar sobre el pasado, el futuro o incluso invenciones y no hay ningún problema, la gente normalmente te entiende. Productivity. Human language is essentially creative or productive. Humans can understand and produce new sentences. Esa teoría que hay de que hay muchas frases que no se han dicho nunca. Pues totalmente de acuerdo. Podemos crear cualquier frase, pero obviamente tiene que tener un sentido. Undiscreteness. The sounds used in language are meaningfully distinct. Es decir, que dependiendo de la oración que decimos, pues obviamente queremos que el contenido de esa oración sea lo más fácil de entender posible. And to summarize, all these features show that language is a complicated process which is unconscious and effortless when children learn their mother tongue, but conscious and difficult when learning a foreign language. Obviamente es muy sencillo, pues cuando estás aprendiendo tu lengua materna, pues porque tienes un bombardeo constante de todo lo que estamos hablando, es decir, en todo momento estás, que si escuchando la tele, que si hablando que si tus padres hablando, tu familia, en el colegio, en el tal, todo esto hace que pues, inconscientemente y de forma y sin esforzarte mucho, pues aprendes. Pero, ¿qué pasa? Que muchas veces cuando aprendemos la lengua extranjera, pues es más complicado, ¿no? Bien. Pasamos a la 2.2, Communication Theories. So, nowadays, language is considered as a mean of communication, not simply as a system of structures and words. The discipline that studies the factors that govern our choice of language in social interaction is called pragmatics. There are three approaches on communication theory: the cooperative principle, the speech act theory, and discourse analysis. So let's start. Cooperative principle. Regarding cooperative principle, the American philosopher Paul Gray established that people cooperate in the process of communication to reduce misunderstandings. Four maximal rules of conversation can be distinguished: maxim of quantity, of relevance, of quality, and of manner. These maxims are implicit principles on which successful communication is built. Bueno, como ya sabemos, como nos dice el señor Paul Grice, lo que pasa es que nosotros cooperamos, como hemos dicho anteriormente, para reducir los malentendidos en una oración. Entonces, es muy importante que en cada oración o en cada proceso comunicativo que realizamos tenemos estas cuatro máximas: cantidad, relevancia, calidad y la manera en que lo explicamos, lo que queremos explicar. ¿De acuerdo? Entonces, esta es la primera, Cooperative Principle, cooperamos para que no haya malentendidos. La segunda es un poco más complicada, se llama Speech Act Theory. Bien, y tiene tres actos. Well, with respect to Speech Act Theory, the British philosopher J.L. Austin established that many utterances, es decir, oraciones o frases, do not communicate information, but are equivalent to actions. three types of performative acts can be distinguished: locutionary, illocutionary, and perlocutionary act. So, let's start. Locutionary act refers to the literal meaning conveyed by the words and structures contained in the utterance. For example, it's cold today, a statement about the weather. No os preocupéis que ahora lo entenderemos cuando leamos las tres. Illocutionary act mentions the act which is performed as a result of the speaker making an utterance, such as requesting, ordering, informing, promising, warning, welcoming, betting, informing, ordering, and so on. It's the speaker intent. For instance, what's the time? Requesting for time. So, this locutionary act is the literal meaning conveyed by the words. It's called today, statement about the weather. Illocutionary act talks about the act which is performed as a result. So it's the speaker intent. What's your intention when you say, what's the time? So requesting for time, right? But then we have the perlocutionary act, refers to the effect the speaker's utterance has on the listener. It has an effect on the feelings, thought, or actions of either the speaker or the listener, such as persuading, commanding, convincing, etc. For example, go to bed. It's a command, right? So let's see two examples in here. We have, it's hot in here. So the locutionary act, that is the literal meaning, is referring to temperature. Illocutionary act is a request from someone to turn on the air conditioning. And the perlocutionary act is someone getting up and turning on the air conditioning. So in conclusion, locutionary act is the production of meaningful utterances and expressions, which leads to the illocutionary act, which is the intention of producing meaningful expressions, which causes the performance of perlocutionary act, which is the effect, right? Do you understand? Well, if you don't understand, you can leave me a comment and I will explain much better. I think this is quite difficult to understand at first, but the example is quite reflective on it. So I hope that you understand. Then, when we have this speech act theory, we also have a classification of the speech acts, which, as you might remember, locutionary, locutionary, and locutionary act, right? So speech acts are representative, directive, commissive, expressive, and declarative. Okay? So representative refers to the description of states and events with an assertion. For example, today is Sunday. Representative is an assertion. Asertivo, decir alguna cosa en afirmativa. Today is Sunday. Directive makes reference to expressions that are to cause the hearer to take a particular actions. They express what the speaker wants. Suggestions, commands, requestings. Please be quiet. Commissive mention expressions of attitudes and emotions, like threats, promises, offers, refusals. For example, if you pass the exam, you'll get a prize. Expressive, obviously, are expression of feelings and attitudes, like pleasure, pain, like, dislike, or sorrow. Like, film is good, you're saying you liked the film. And declarative refers to marrying, christening, divorcing, resigning, firing, and declaring in institutional frameworks, like I pronounce you husband and wife, you're out, or declare you the natural successor. Alright, do you understand? Finally, as a third communication theory, we have the discourse analysis, which is quite simple. Discourse analysis is a method for studying written or spoken language in relation to its social context. So we are relating social context with language. Okay? It aims to understand how language is used in real life situations. When you do discourse analysis, you might focus on the purpose and effect of different types of language, cultural rules, and convention in communication, how values, belief, and assumptions are communicated, and how language use relates to the social, political, and historical context. So we will have some expressions in every language that it refers to some social, political, or historical context, and we say it like refranes in castellano, that are these discourse analysis. So depending on the history of the country, on what happened to the inhabitants and all this, we will have discourse analysis. Well, we will discourse analysis, which is the analysis of the social context and language together. Okay? Now, let's move on to oral and written language. So, among all the communication codes which are used by humans, music, kinesthetics, sign language, etc., written and oral language are the most efficient for the transmission and reception of information, thought, feeling, and opinions. In addition, these linguistic codes are exclusively humans and make us distinct from animals. The most obvious difference between oral and written language is the physical form. Listening, so oral, is different from reading, which is written. Speech is immediate, dynamic, transitory, and interactive. Writing is static and permanent. It has unique graphic features like spelling, punctuation, etc. The grammatical structure is more correct than oral language, and the ideas should be clearer because you have more time to think about that. It is not as dynamic or as spontaneous as written, as oral, sorry. So, knowing the differences between speech and writing will allow the teacher to design activities according to the difficulty of the skill that must be developed. Written communication involves both the productive skills of the writer and the receptive skills of the reader. The difficulty of the written medium, along with the differences between oral and written language, means that written understanding and production are introduced later than oral skills. Now, what does that mean? So, as I said in the introduction, we have 4 basic skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So, listening, we start with listening. The baby starts listening to their families, to friends, to the TV, whatever. Then starts speaking, starts copying what he or she is listening, right? Then we have reading, that is the passive part of the written medium, okay? And then we have writing, which is the active part of the written medium, right? So that's why here we have that means that written understanding and production are introduced later than oral skills. Oral skills are first, and then we go to written skills if we want, right? It happens a lot with old people that know how to speak, but they don't know how to write a letter or read in Spanish, for instance. So there's no problem. And this is not a problem in communication, because normally with the oral skills it's easier to communicate than with written. But we will talk about that in another video. Right, so I thought about some characteristics of oral language, and for example, the immediacy of oral language makes it more expressive than writing. The use of gestures and body language is important. The spontaneity and speed of oral language makes a person build simple sentences. The use of pauses, repetitions, or rephrasing is usual, and it's normal to make mistakes when uttering words, when you are saying words, and it's so spontaneous, so maybe you are doing some mistakes, but there's no problem, right? You can mend that mistakes. Then, what about written language? We have the fact that writing is more permanent, allows more time for its preparation. We need to be clear. We need to consider punctuation, spelling, space organization, capitalization, and so on. And written language tends to be more formal. Now, pedagogical implication. As we said before, we are talking about, well, we start with oral skills and then we move on to written skills, right? So oral language is easier to acquire than written language. Somebody that has normal conditions, that has no affections, it will be easier for them to speak, but maybe not so much to write in a language. Written language is characterized by a bigger demand in the correction of its structures. Errors are considered positive evidences of the learning process. Spelling exercises are important, obviously with kids, the understanding of oral expression should be encouraged. So oral expressions, idioms, and so on, it's very important because they can teach us some historical parts of Britain, for instance, or some cultural parts of the United States or Australia. The graphic feature of writing makes the learning of these skills the slowest to acquire, and also we have a problem that in English it happens something incredibly difficult. That is that we write in a way, but we pronounce it in a different way. So it might be a little bit difficult. And as I said, first of all, oral skills, then written skills. Right. So let's move on to factors. Well, we studied these a lot of times in ESO, in secondary education, obviously in bachillerato also. But let's see. I chose David Crystal, the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language, which is a great book. I absolutely recommend you. And we have different factors that appear in a communicative situation. We have 9: the sender, the receiver, the message, the channel, the context, the purpose, the topic, the code, and the register. So let's see another time, again and again, what are these factors. We have the sender, which is the person who transmits the message. The receiver is the person or group of people to whom the message is addressed to. The message is the content of information that the speaker sends to the listener. So it's the information that you want to transmit. The channel is the place through which the message flows. The context is the situation in which the speaker and the listener are in, which sometimes help to interpret the message. The purpose is the intention of the message. The topic is the matter about which the interaction develops. The code is a limited and moderately wide group of signs which combine according to certain rules known by the speaker and listener. And the register relates all the factors entering a communicative situation. Alright? So obviously in the English class we need to keep these factors in mind, since it is through small communicative acts that we will introduce language structures and vocabulary. So it's extremely important that we know all these factors and we put it to use and to our advantage. Then we have 3 types of communication, as I said before. We have one-way communication, restricted two-way communication, and full two-way communication. Let's see the examples. So, one-way communication, when the message is only receptive. The listener or the reader will receive the message but do not respond. For instance, watching a video or reading. Restrictive two-way communication. This involves the learner responding orally to someone, but he does not use the target language. The response may be in the learner's native tongue, or it may involve non-verbal response. And then full two-way communication, when the learner both encodes and decodes messages, acting as a sender and a receiver, right? This is the most proficient way to communicate, when you two can communicate, or if you're in a group. Right. And finally, to conclude, before the conclusion, but to conclude with the topic as such, we have functionality and context. The most important part in here is Jacobson's model. The Jacobson's model is also studied in secondary education, and it's extremely important in the English language that we understand and we can produce all these functions of language. For instance, we have 6. We have the referential function, in order to give information, used to express idea or facts. Okay? Emotional functions, obviously feelings and attitudes. Fatigue functions to establish a comfortable relationship with people. It's used for social purposes, for instance, good morning or nice to meet you. Poetic function, to take delight in it, used for aesthetic purposes or as verbal play. Okay? It's very important in the English class. The crosswords, jokes, riddles, tongue twisters, etc. are very, very important. Obviously, songs are extremely important in the English class. Metalingual functions, it's used when explanations are requested for clarification. For example, I don't understand or I can't read this. So we need clarification for something that we do not understand. And finally, conative functions used to draw the addressee attention. Excuse me, pay attention, please be quiet, and so on. So the context establishes the register we must use when we are talking about different function and context. We are talking about the strategic and sociocultural competence. Linguists distinguish between linguistic context and situational context. The former refers to the context provided by the linguistic system itself. It's the text that accompanies the sentences. The latter refers to the place and the moment in which the communicative act is developed. In the English class, the student should not only be able to communicate a message, he or she should also learn how to select the language form to use in a certain context. This is very important, right? They must know when he or she is in a situation, like for example, talking to their parents or a teacher, he or she must be really respectful and talk in a certain way that maybe when they are with their friends, they are not as polite and as formal, right? As same as us. If we are talking with the headmaster of our school, it's not the same as we are talking with a colleague or a friend of a relative, right? It's different. So we must, also the teachers must know this. And finally, as a conclusion, I take into account this. In a nutshell, I would like to say that learning a foreign language today implies knowing how to use language just as a native does, knowing the structure and the vocabulary at oral and written levels in a variety of circumstances and situations, both at verbal and non-verbal level. Right? Let's think about this for a second. Knowing how to use language just as a native does, knowing the structures and the vocabulary at oral and written levels in a variety of circumstances and situations, both at verbal and non-verbal levels. So this is a magnus and difficult activity to do. This is a really key objective of primary education, and students must know English in a way that they can communicate. If, for example, at 12 years old, you can take them and put them in Great Britain, for instance, or in Australia, they must be able at least to communicate and to try to ask some questions in order to be in a situation. So it's extremely important that they know the basic structure and vocabulary at oral and written levels. For example, if they have to read something, maybe they cannot communicate, but if they can read, it's okay. In a variety of circumstances and situations, the context that we are talking about like 2 or 3 minutes ago, both at verbal and non-verbal level. So verbal with the words and non-verbal with non-verbal communication. Okay? We can conclude by highlighting 2 ideas. Communication is the main aim in the learning of foreign language, and communicating means using language in an appropriate way and with an acceptable correction and fluency. As we just seen, the function of the message and the factors that intervene in a communication act are aspects which must be included in the methodology of the foreign language. This is the conclusion of the topic 1, which, as you might remember, is topic 1, language as communication, oral and written language, factors defining a communicative situation, sender, receiver, etc., functionality and context. En español, bueno, ¿cómo sabemos que hemos desarrollado un tema correctamente? Bueno, muy simple. Tenemos que ser capaces de ver el título y ver si hemos desarrollado todas las partes que nos piden. Aparte de eso, debemos decir, vale, este tema tiene calidad, tiene diferentes autores, se ha relacionado con el currículum. Todo esto lo tenemos que tener muy en cuenta. Y al final tener una introducción y una conclusión que sean, en primer lugar, la introducción que llame la atención, que sea diferente, que sea divertida, que sea muy correcta y una conclusión que englobe todo lo que hemos estado hablando. ¿De acuerdo? Bueno, muchas gracias por ver el vídeo. Termino aquí la primera parte de estas 25 que vamos a hacer desarrollando todos los temas y nada más, espero que os haya gustado. Ya sabéis que tenéis en la cajita de la descripción, si queréis que trabajemos juntos para probar y para sacar esa plaza, tenéis un formulario de Google en la descripción donde lo podéis rellenar y yo os contactaré lo antes posible. Concertamos una cita y comenzamos a trabajar. Así que muchas gracias por todo. Espero que os haya gustado este primer Topic 1 y nos vemos en el siguiente vídeo. Adiós.